Okay, let's continue. Let me see here. Hold on a second. Here we go. So the boot process, when the system boots up, what happens? Well, the first thing you need to know, there is the basic input-output system, which is a chip that is on the motherboard and that holds the basic input-output system, meaning the basic device drivers that the operating system needs to operate the hardware. So every piece of hardware on your computer has to have a program to run to make it work. We call that a device driver. So we put all the basic ones in a chip on the motherboard. That's called the BIOS. And the newer one is called the UEFI, which is pretty much the same thing. Please take a picture of those. Make sure you know what these two are. The time they call them the firmware. This is where the basic operating system is running. Okay, so the boot process, the first thing that happens when you turn your computer on, actually before even any of this happens, there is a program called POST, P-O-S-T, the Power On Self-Test, a program that runs and makes sure that all the hardware is where they're supposed to be and they are operating correctly. A quick test. And then you're going to decide on whether you have a boot manager. The boot manager is going to be executed first. And then you go in and you start loading all the appropriate files before the actual GUI version boots up. Okay? You can read all of that. Okay, once you start up the operating system, then the operating system is going to look at the registry. So all applications have to register themselves in the registry to let them know how the how the operating system and what resources the operating system needs to use. So you can actually access the registry by typing msconfig on your computer. Okay, so write that down. Just type msconfig and I'll show you. If you go to run and you type msconfig, and you'll have access to your, hello, where are you? Here it is, right here. And here's your system configuration. You can go through the boot, the services, the startup files, and the tools. So let's take a look at what of these tabs and what they are and what they do and what they are responsible for. All right, so let's just continue. Just type msconfig. All right, so the general tab, so you should know these, by the way. Let me just go back. This is just the normal startup. If you want normal startup, if you want diagnostic startup, so you do that. Okay. If you feel that the operating system is not running correctly. All right. To boot up, you want to boot up in safe mode. Safe mode meaning that your operating system is going to only load up the important files to get the operating system up and running. It's not going to run all the whole GUI. So you may not even have networking services. The services tab is important tab because sometimes if they have a lot of services running, and that might slow your computer. In fact, the startup tab is what's important. So the application and services that are configured to automatically start up. So if you feel that your computer is sluggish, this is where you go in, the startup. Take a picture of this. Okay? So if somebody brings in a computer and says, my computer is running slow, this is where you go and see if you can take out any application that automatically boots up or is launched when your operating system is up and running. And then you got the tools, all the different types of tools that you can use, which is really nice to help you troubleshoot and fix a lot of the problems. Take a picture of that. So this is where you can have access to them, although you can access them also within the control panel as well. All right, when you are shutting your computer, it's very important to use the start menu to shut down. Don't just turn off the power because Windows need to make sure it shuts down the applications and to record any changes in the configuration file, because sometimes the file might get corrupted and you're going to have a problem, even the operating system itself. So don't forget that. Always, always use the start shutdown so that the operating system can do it shuts down normally. All right, processes, threads, and services. So a Windows application is made up of processes. So a process is a program that is currently executing. So you can have an application just runs a few processes, and sometimes the processes may be used by other applications as well. So this is just you really need just more and more this terminology more than anything else. Memory allocations and handles. So if you don't have enough memory, your computer will use the hard drive. And using the hard drive as temporarily memory, it's going to be a problem because it will slow your computer tremendously. So having enough memory will make sure when an application boots up, everything is loaded. Okay? So that's very, very important. Have enough memory. That's even more important than the actual CPU speed. So the more memory you have, the faster your application will be executed because everything is loaded from the hard drive. You don't want to use your hard drive is only for long-term storage. Okay? You can read all of that later on. All right. So here is a powerful tool for viewing is RAM map. So you can download that and find out more about your memory. Probably is something that you could use if you want to. The Windows registry, like I said to you earlier, Windows stores all the information of the hardware, application users, and system settings in a large database known as the register. Please take a picture of this and know the different type of keys that are in there and subkeys in each one of them. You should not make any changes to the registry if you don't know, if you're really not an expert, because you can have your computer act funny later on. So if you're not familiar with the registry, stay away from it. But the registry is very important. Windows registers everything in there. It goes in, it looks at, what it needs to do to execute a specific application or a hardware, if any of the thing changes on it. All right, so these are the different subkeys in the register. You can have access each one of them and make changes to it. You can type regedit and you'll have access to the registry. Sometimes you can, you may want to troubleshoot, you may want to enable a specific thing on a piece of hardware and or disable it by even just by, by going into the registry. But again, like I said, if you're not good with it, if you're not familiar with it, stay away from it. Okay? And a lot of time when you make changes, you either use a binary numbers, either 1 or 0. 1 means activate, 0 means deactivate. Okay? Most of the time, that's what you would use. A binary instead of a word or a string value. All right, so let's get into the configuration and monitoring and to monitor. All right. If you have a specific application that is having a hard time running, you can run as an administrator. So right click on a specific app, run as an administrator, then you will have all the rights that you can do. A lot of times when you're trying to run an application and it doesn't work, or it's telling you don't have enough administrative rights to do it, that's probably what you need to do. Go into the executable file of that application, right click, and say run as an administrator. And you should be okay with that. Okay? So you can run any executable file in the command prompt, you can do the same thing. So you go to your computer, here, let me show you. You can go in here and type CMD, the command prompt, and when you go right here, right click and run as an administrator. And you'll be able, all your files, you'll have access to all the files that are needed to execute any application and any command that you want. But if you are not the administrator, this is not going to help, of course. You won't be able to run anything as an administrator. All right, so moving on. Local users and domains. You can create multiple users if you need multiple users to use your PC, and of course you don't want them to give them supervisory rights to your computer, but that can easily be done. Domains is an area where users and the administrator can have common resources that they need to access. Typically, you're connected to a server, a domain, and if you ever take the server class that we have, we'll go over that. By default, you are in a work group, like a peer-to-peer top of a domain. So you're not really connected to a network or anything by default. Okay, so local user group are managed with the LUSR manager. So that's not that important. There is the command line, CLI, and there is the PowerShell. The PowerShell is more powerful than the command line, the CMD. So when your Windows may have the PowerShell, it will allow you to write scripts and a whole bunch of other things to run things automatically. The command line also has almost all the commands that are needed to run your PC successfully without any problems. So we will practice some of these commands in class. Okay, so with the PowerShell. And with, here's a typical PowerShell, which is really, again, it's CLI. Here's some commands that you can use. This is more we do the PowerShell when we cover in the server class more than anything else. We typically don't do as much in this class, but we want you to be familiar with it. The management instrumentation. So the management instrumentation is the WMI, control the properties of Windows, as you can see. So that will allow you to, there are 4 tabs in there. There is the general, the backup, the security, and the advanced. Okay, so take a picture of this. So this will tell you on how to manage your computer. All right. So if you wanted to manage your, if you wanted to manage your, if you want to back up your data, you go right here to how to back up the data or restore it. Okay. All right, the net command, this is more for networking. Again, take a picture of that. We will use that a lot. So these are some of the commands that you could use at the command line. You probably would do this if you don't have access to the GUI. And remember, you want to use commands because they use less processor, or less memory. So things will get executed very, very quickly if you want to. But you can do all of this into the in the GUI. All right. Again, take a picture of that. Here are some of the commands that you can use. This way you can have access to them whenever you can use some of these commands in PowerShell or the CLI, the command prompt. The task manager, if you do Control-Alt-Delete and you choose task manager, you'll have access to all of this. You have the processes that are running. So if your computer becomes unresponsive, this is probably the place to go. You can shut down any of these, right click, shut them down. It tells you the performance of each one of them. The app history, the startup files that we talked about earlier, you have access to that as well. It uses the details and the services. This is the place where I usually go if the computer just hangs up. So we will look at that later on. Networking is when you have your computer want it to be connected to a network or even the internet. Okay, so the network and sharing center. So we'll practice a lot of this. If you want to, and the adapter setting, if you want to set up, this is you can access from the control panel. Or that little icon on the bottom right hand right here. You click right here, and also I have a Windows 11, and you can go to right here into your applications, and you can access to it. But in Windows 11, it's a little bit different than what it's showing right here. For Windows 10, this is a Windows 10 PC. Anyway,